Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the City of Miramar's Bizfit program. This is the third installment of our series that began in June. Today, we have a series of speakers with additional business assistance information. Our first speaker, unfortunately, is under the weather. So in her absence, we will be running a video of a prior webinar that she conducted on business assistance. Lisa Perez is the founder and president of human resources consulting company HBL Resources, Inc. She's a certified bridge builder, facilitating generational diversity workshops, and is a DISC certified human behavior specialist. She's been recognized throughout her 30-year career, including Silver Stevie American Business Awards for Entrepreneur of the Year and HR Professional of the Year in the year 2020. She's on a mission to reduce the statistics that indicate 60% of employees say managers are the reason they left their company. So she speaks to organizations about the need for soft skills management, training, to ensure no matter how tough the conversation, every employee walks out of their manager's office with their dignity intact. In doing this, organizations reduce liability, increase employee retention, and improve business performance. So with that, we will roll the video of her presentation from a prior webinar.
My name is Lisa Perez. I'm president of HBL Resources. We have 3 streams of service. Glad to see you here, Maria, Joanna. Great to see you all. We focus on 3 streams of service: consultation, HR administration, and training and development. And this year, especially with what's going on in our workplace today, we have forced ourselves into the webinar space, which was up and coming. We just had to do it a little bit sooner. And so we're going to be talking about what you need to do when responding to a positive COVID-19 diagnosis, right? We are starting to look forward into the future to say, okay, when will we get back to work? And I think that it's safe to say that we are going to potentially experience a positive diagnosis in the workplace at some point in the future. And so we are hoping to prepare you in advance for that so that you know exactly what to do. And you know, you're welcome to call me in the moment. God forbid that should happen, but we want to prepare you in advance. So let's go ahead and dive right in. With a COVID-19 diagnosis, the first thing you want to know is that your responsibility is to keep your employees safe in the workplace, right? OSHA compliance is important, but there's so many other things that we need to take into consideration. So the employee walks into your door, the first thing you want to make sure of is that you know exactly what to do and what considerations need to happen. So first and foremost, you've got to think about the CDC, right? The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. That is the first and foremost leader in what's going on today in the workplace with the guidance under COVID-19. You've got an employee that's confirmed. You're responsible to ensure that you inform fellow employees of their possible exposure, but we've got to talk about maintaining confidentiality because that's required under the ADA, and we'll talk about that in a minute, right? You want to make sure that coworkers then self-monitor symptoms, and we'll walk through what that timeline and conversation looks like, but we're going to start with a broad overview of these legal considerations. CDC also requires that we address cleaning and disinfecting measures that should be taken in the workplace, okay? And I've got a complete legal guide and some quick links for you. I'll let you know at the end how you can gain access to those things, but we want to make sure that we understand what gets regulated next, right? Then we've got OSHA, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration. Their main goal is to ensure that we as employers maintain a workplace free from illness exposure and accident exposure. And illness is definitely the area that would be covered under the COVID-19 arena. We've got some resource guides that we've located. They're getting updated regularly, but those quick quick links will help you gain access to those resources directly from the best sources. And then we've got to talk about ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act. At this time, ADA, EEOC has not determined whether COVID-19 triggers ADA, but there are definitely some things that we as employers need to ensure that are ADA specific. First and foremost, that confidentiality piece. And we'll talk about how do we tell people that they've been exposed and not tell them how, right? But we'll get to that when we look at the specific timeline. Then you've got the EEOC. The EEOC was quiet in the first few weeks of this breakout, this recent situation that we've had. And now they're starting to provide some very clear guidance, especially in terms of one, following the CDC, that's their recommendation as well. So it's not just coming from me, right? Or the world at large. The EEOC advises that all information about these kinds of disability-related inquiries and even medical examinations need to be kept confidential, because you probably have heard already that we are permitted as employers to start to take temperatures in the workplace, right? And that would be considered in some situations a medical examination. Well, what do we do with that information? And we'll touch a little bit on that as well. And certainly we'll be having some follow-up Q&A. So if you've got some questions as we go through, I'll take them probably for the last 15 minutes, 10 minutes of the webinar. I've got a lot of content to get through. So the EEOC's guidance is primarily ensuring that we are not treating employees discriminatorily as a result of having to take their paid sick time benefits, the family medical leave extension that we have seen, right? EFMLEA, right? Emergency Family Medical Leave Expansion Act, right? Because they've expanded it to include children's daycare centers and those providers of childcare. So it's really expanded the coverage under FMLA. So we can't discriminate because employees are taking advantage of these benefits, right, that are being written for them. So then we also want to understand that we only have a responsibility to reasonably interpret the EEOC guidance. And one of the links that I have is to the Department of Labor with at least 60 questions, right, that have been answered by the EEOC, the Department of Labor, and how all these things relate to each other. And then we've got HIPAA, the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, right? HIPAA. I always call this section alphabet soup, right? There's always so many things to consider when it comes to these acronyms and letters and stuff. So the HIPAA consideration is, what employers have access to healthcare provided information. Well, what does that mean? Okay, an employee walks in, says, hey, I'm notifying you that I've tested positive. The employer would not necessarily be subject to HIPAA requirements here, right? That confidentiality piece. But some of you may have protected health information from your healthcare providers, from your healthcare plans. And those, when you have access to that information, that is the information, that protected health information coming from your health plans, that you do now trigger Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, right? So the confidentiality piece really comes from the ADA and this medical piece, not necessarily from HIPAA, unless you're getting that information from that source, that healthcare plan, healthcare information. Okay, give me a thumbs up if we've got any questions. I'm happy to answer a few as we go along if I see them in the chat, making sure that you are out there and listening and we can interact as best as possible. Okay, so now we've got this timeline that we have to consider. What happens when that employee shows up at the door, or maybe even a phone call, right? Ideally, we'd love to see that they're calling us from home, that they're not in the workplace. Thanks, Jane. Thumbs up. I know we're all there together. So I know that I've got something I've got to do immediately, right? So let's take a look at what this timeline looks like. Immediately, you've got to figure out what's my strategy, right? And we're doing this webinar now so that you can begin that determination of strategy now. Okay, so immediately determine what your strategy is. That means, quickly determine an employee to leave the workplace, right? Maybe they just came back from a doctor's visit, right? And they just didn't think to go home first. They came in to work first. So we want to make sure that we have a strategy for them to leave. You want to immediately get them out of, the general area and find an office that you can go to, that you can be alone and private with that individual, right? We want to make sure that we consider how to handle the situation, avoid exposure to others, but protect the dignity and privacy of that individual. Making sure that, many of our workforces and workplaces, do we have PPE, personal protective equipment? Do we have masks at the location? And I would definitely recommend at this point that our first aid kits currently, you go ahead and equip them, stock them with a few face masks. And you should have medical gloves already in those first aid kits, but go ahead and put some extra in there, because we may need to use them for Band-Aid, but we may need to use them because of contact with an employee who may have tested positive, okay? So those are the immediate things, right? Get them into an office. Let's, figure out how we avoid them to exposure and the best strategy to get them out of the workplace, without being so obvious and exposing them to others. Very, very important. And I'm all about making sure interactions with employees end with dignity intact on both sides, right? So now we've got a 1 to 2 hour window. We've got to initiate, obviously, that conversation with the employee. And we're going to walk you through some of the things that you should be asking during that conversation. So that's why that asterisk is there. We're going to go ahead and cover that a little bit later. So you want to make sure that you meet with key individuals. Who is the employee's manager, supervisor? Do you have a human resources designate, right? Get them on the phone. And if you don't have one and you think you need one, we are happy to be that resource for you. Assess whether to send all the employee home for the day or to close. Where did the employee work? Who may they have come into contact with? And then, having this conversation is assuming that the employee is medically able to participate, right? If they called from the hospital or a loved one's called from the hospital and they've been infected and quickly responded to the illness, then you want to take those things into consideration. But these are the types of things we want to do within that immediacy, right? Develop a list of the likely individuals who may have come into contact with this employee, right? Who could have been infected, or who could have been in the same workspace, who's the supervisor, the manager? Did they have any meetings outside of the workplace that might have caused contact with another, right? A client, a customer, a vendor, any of those individuals. And then you've got to start to prepare, what are you going to say to the employees? And we'll get to that as well here in a moment. We've got some sample notices that we can provide you, sample letters to employees, the whole 9 yards. We've got you covered here. So determine the compensation to that individual, right? Are they now eligible? And it would be safe to say that they would be eligible for the emergency paid sick leave, right? If you're an employer, 500 employees or less, you are covered. There are some caveats for small businesses under 50, but I think the threshold's going to be so high. Get ready to pay that. EPSLA is what we call it, right? Emergency paid sick leave. The A means for the act, right? Identify the person who is going to arrange for the cleaning and disinfecting of the location, right? And if you've got a commercial, printing company and the employees there in the production area, comes and goes through that space, doesn't really come into contact with your front office, your main entrance, any of those kinds of things. Keep those things into consideration, but I would err on the side of caution and have the entire facility disinfected with your commercial cleaning company, okay? Assign individuals to implement the response plan, right? Because you can't take it all on your own. There's a couple of moving parts here, so you want to make sure that you can delegate particular people to go ahead and manage that situation. So you also want to make sure that you're doing all of this within CDC guidelines. CDC has some guidance on cleaning and disinfecting. They've got some coordinated efforts with the EEOC on how to handle someone's workplace, right? Because you can't go, touching everybody's things and getting rid of everything. We want to make sure that we are going in accordance with both those regulation body. So that's a lot to do in the first couple hours. Let's take a look as things progress. What do we need to do next? The next thing is you want to assess the work impact of either the employees leaving the facility, right? Because they obviously had things that they were working on, that they were doing. Who is going to maintain that once we reopen the facility? And that might be in a day or two, right? After the disinfecting, to go ahead and maintain business continuity. So determine who can work remotely, right? We've probably already figured that out, right? We're a little bit behind that. And we did do a podcast on managing remote workers. I'll share that after this to those who attended today so that you can get some insight on the continuation of managing remote workers. So you want to execute your communication plan for the coworkers and others that may have come into contact with the infected individual. And again, we will get to that here at the latter part of this webinar. You want to communicate about the closure of the facility. When will they anticipate returning to work? My recommendation to my clients has been to communicate on a weekly basis. We have seen how this situation has changed hour by hour, right? Day by day. So I recommend that employers check in with their employees on Thursday or Friday so that they know what's happening the following week, right? You can't say, oh, you're being furloughed and we'll, call you in 12 weeks. Well, things could change drastically in 12 weeks. And, while I'm not going to go off to Puerto Rico and be on the beach anytime soon during this furlough, I definitely think it's best to do week by week so that you can pivot and shift and get back to work or provide work, remote work arrangements and things of that nature on an ongoing basis. You want to make sure that per CDC guidelines, you're coordinating if you are a facility that needs to coordinate with state and local officials, right? We see that there are organizations out there that want to have gatherings and do specific things to maintain the community that we have, right? We want to make sure that we're doing all of those things in accordance with state and local health officials. So keep those things in mind. Call your local chamber. We are sponsored today by not only HBL Resources, but the Miramar Pembroke Pines Regional Chamber of Commerce. They are a huge resource. If you are not a member, then you definitely need to reconsider because they are putting out some great content. Not just this one, a lot more going forward. So definitely get in touch with me on that so we can put you in touch with them as a great resource for your business. Then you want to make sure that, if it's applicable, do you need to release a media statement, right? This might be for larger employers, things of that nature. Has there been a mass closing or things of that nature that you want to consider? May not apply to most employers, but you definitely want to consider that as a possibility, right? And media today could be social media, right? That may mean you're closed for the next 2 days. Your clients and customers and guests didn't know that. Get the word out via that social media that says, hey, we know you had a reservation, but guess what? We can't house you, or whatever the case may be. Prepare a statement for customers, vendors, business associates, because again, business continuity is important. You want to make sure that your customers who are supposed to pick up that item yesterday know that you've been closed or you will be closed. So you've got to get ahead of what your workforce looks like, what your customer relations looks like, so that you can respond to any customer, vendor, or business associate needs. And then make sure that you're confirming arrangements for your cleaning, your disinfecting. We have great resources with the chamber. I personally have a commercial cleaner that I recommend that are, in compliance with CDC guidelines, because that's a big deal. Now, I know that these links are huge. We have a resource guide that we will be able to get to you so that you can link to the CDC's own recommendations on the disinfection processes, some of the best cleaning, all of that kind of stuff and resources for your business. So you want to get those things confirmed. And at the end of the webinar, I'll definitely let you know how you can get that quick link quick link guide. I just can't seem to say that today, can I? So now we've got a window. We've taken care of all of these conversations that need to happen. We've figured out what we're going to do in the next 24 to 48 hours. Well, what do we do in those 24 to 48 hours? We conduct the cleaning, right? We already figured that out. We want to make sure that we're closing off any areas that the infected person was at so that nobody else walks in there. That's an important thing. You want to remember that if you are an employer subject to OSHA record keeping requirements, right, then you make sure that you've got that record of that in your logs, right? Because there are some OSHA logs that are required. Open the windows, get the windows open to your facility, get the air circulation going, make sure that you can air that out because of obviously, respiration and all that. I'm not saying it's in the air, but it is a CDC recommendation to go ahead and get those windows open. And then if possible, wait 24 hours before beginning cleaning. Okay. I think we've seen that, indication that the virus can last certain hours, certain days on certain materials. So you want to keep that in mind to go ahead and get that scheduled. At least, wait up to 24 hours is the recommendation. And then again, develop a plan to address any impacted essential employees, right? Essential meaning, oh my gosh, you're the general manager, you're my right arm, you're my right hand person. What is it that that individual needs to do, and how do we get them set up on a remote work situation, that kind of thing, which we've put into play. Okay, develop the plan for compensation of the impacted employees, right? Are they going to be able to use their sick time, their vacation time to offset any of the 2 days that you might be closed? What are their benefits that they have? And the Emergency Paid Sick Leave Act. There's another webinar that you can tap into that I did with a dear CPA colleague, my colleague and CPA, Michael Bayeri, to talk about those benefits and how they coordinate for your businesses. So listen in on that one for any questions on how that works and who's eligible and all of that kind of stuff. So how will they be impacted financially, right? We also have a resource guide on our hblresources.com/COVID-19 resource page on employees who might be impacted long-term, like a layoff or a furlough, right? Because those are some things that you need to prepare for. So that's another resource guide, but we'll get to that as well. And then, are you going to be pre-screening when they come back, right? When the employees remain asymptomatic, are we going to pre-screen them and start taking temperatures? What are the repercussions of that? Do we have a policy? How are you going to monitor employee symptoms, right? Are you going to enforce masks and social distancing in the workplace? And then, of course, what is your plan to disinfect on a regular basis? If employees have symptoms, be prepared to send them home immediately and clean and disinfect their work areas as well. Developing a plan to address the impact on production of goods, services to customers, all of those things need to also be considered. So I know that was a lot and we're only 24 hours into it. There's definitely some more that we want to address within the next day or two after the diagnosis, but I'd love to stop here for a minute and take a look. I've had a lot going on in the chat. So let me take a look. Jane, I see you. Great to see you too, Kara. Let's see, do I need, so any chance we will be receiving a recording? Absolutely. We'll be following up with everyone and posting this on our social media, so you can link to the recording of this one as well as another webinar that we did on the PPP and all the acronyms on the financial side of how do we afford all this, right? So would love to hear if there are any questions out there at this time. Okay. Great, no questions. Okay, so we will continue. So now we've got the next step, right? What happens within the next 72 hours, right? So we want to, again, prepare a plan for the diagnosed employee to return to work, right? At some point, we want to know what that plan is and who else might be having to stay away for a while, and when do they come back? Do they come back, or have you figured out a way to have them working remotely, right? So prepare that plan for the diagnosed employee to return to work, right? The CDC guidelines can be very, very helpful. And again, we've got some resource guides because these are very, very complicated. And you've got to be very clear. If they're symptomatic with a positive diagnosis, obviously they need to be excluded from work until at least 3 days past their recovery. That is, as of the recording of this webinar, that is the current CDC recommendation, okay? And then at least 7 days have passed since their symptoms have, first appeared. So if they're asymptomatic, then you can basically have them excluded from work until 10 days after they've passed since the date of the first positive test. So there's a lot there. Returning employees need to be, have PPE, right? Personal protective equipment, face masks, hand sanitizer, right? We've seen that as a major deal right now. Gloves in the workplace, so that if they feel they need those things, that they can have that. And will you be requiring it or not, right? And again, we want to look at state and local level to see what are the requirements there. As of this recording, there has been some mandate to wear those masks outside, right? In public spaces, in your grocery stores and things of that nature. We want to always make sure that we are in compliance with that. So, can you believe it? We're only like a day or so into this. And what needs to happen next is let's take a look at what those conversations with our employees look like. What do I say? If you've ever been in any of my training before, I'm really passionate about skilling and equipping you on what to say, not just the theory, right? But actually the how to. So let's say we've got them in the office now. We've taken care that they are not anywhere near anybody who can, create additional infection. So we want to, obviously, we talked about this already, immediately isolate in an enclosed space, right? That's why they're in that next office, right? Hey, hi, I'm here. Let's get into this office really quick, right? So conference rooms, office spaces, that tends to work fine. Typically, our conference rooms, aren't always in use. So that is the most likely. But if your conference room is way in the back of the building, then you may not want to walk the employee through. So find the closest area to have that discussion. The employee should be advised to seek medical attention if they haven't already, right? Because sometimes they may have self-diagnosed and they're walking and saying, I think I've got it. So we want to consider both of those scenarios. And then you want to obviously thank them for letting you know, right? A lot of employees, they may be worried they'll lose their job, they won't be able to work. How will they, get income if they have it, or, and if they have been diagnosed definitively. So we want to be compassionate about that. Thank you for letting us know. We hope you guys, you and your family take whatever steps are necessary. Your health is the most important. And as an employer, if we can help in any way, let us know, right? We want to make sure that we take steps to address the safety and work issues. Who have you been in contact with in the last, 72 hours, right? That is a critical thing. So we can designate someone to discuss, if it's not yourself, that with the other employees who may have been exposed, right? We want to ask the employee, obviously, that they remain away from the workplace. They may already know that from their health care provider, and that's based on healthcare information and CDC guidelines, right? We want to make sure that they are encouraged to continue home isolation according to the CDC's guidelines. And again, I have that resource guide. We can get that directly to you in the quick links guide that we have. We want to make sure that any personal issues are taken care of, okay? Is there anything in your office space that you need to take home with you, right? Maybe they have, I don't know, who knows what people keep in their desks and workspaces anymore. But make sure that you address that, right? Is there anything that we need to get from you in your personal area? What personal property? Is there anything that we can do to be helpful, right? And here's where you can volunteer the information about the paid sick leave benefits that they have. And if you haven't seen it already, in one of our e-newsletters, there's already a poster that you have to add to the posters in the workplace outlining the Emergency Family Medical Leave Expansion Act, as well as the Emergency Paid Sick Leave Act. So you want to make sure to get those resources posted because that's a new requirement. So what benefits do they have? Will they be eligible for these benefits? What about their health insurance? Is that going to continue? And obviously, if they're still currently employed, of course, that's going to continue. If they have a shared cost, of course, they have to continue those shared costs. You know, all of these things should happen, and you need to converse with the employee about that, at least in a bullet point fashion, so that you can give that employee peace of mind. And then if you have to follow up later when you get them off site, off the property, and go through things in a little bit more detail, obviously that's fine, because you've got to consider your health as well. What work issues do we need to address for them, right? Who have you been in contact with? Have you had any meetings outside of workplace? What work do you have right now that we need to consider continuity for? What projects do you have? And who is the best person to designate that to, right? Who's the number 2 in your area? Have you done enough in your succession planning within your organizations to ensure that, oh, if something happens, I do have someone else who can take on that responsibility? And for us small employers, that's critical, right? You never know when one of your employees may not be there anymore. Who are you ensuring can continue that workload? So cross-training is critical. If you haven't done it already, this might be that call to action. Then we want to look at, what does the employee's workload look like for the next 2 weeks, right? Because they're going to be out for at least that long. We want to make sure that we've got our crystal ball and look into that future a little bit, because again, business continuity is important. We've already taken quite a hit in the last month or so in terms of the productivity in our workplaces. We want to make sure that in the future, when we do start to open up, get people back into the workforce, that we have less business interruption as possible. So does the employee have any meetings scheduled that may not be on their calendar? Where is their laptop? Can get that and let them take that with them? Will they be able to work remotely, or are they maybe a production worker who, you can't make signs at home, right? That's just the reality. So, determining that, and that's obviously part of what your plan needs to be now. What if every, think about, if employee A left, what's the plan? If employee B left, what's the plan, right? Because every employee's workload and ability to work remotely is going to be different, right? So have that plan in place. Again, who do you recommend to tackle these upcoming projects? Is this employee essential versus non-essential? Because there are some triggers around the FMLA piece that would potentially come into play here if they were to be out of work for emergency family medical leave or COVID-19 diagnosis. So you want to look at that coordination of legislation, right? And then you also want to make sure, we've already talked about the cross-training, who else can do this job. Other considerations are important in that you want to assess the contact with others, right? Who do I need to talk to? Who else have you been, in contact with? You want to make sure that we're notifying the employee, the other employees rather. Let the coworkers, customers, business partners know that they may have come in contact with someone who's had a positive diagnosis, again, without identifying the employee by name. That is a critical thing. Although some individuals may provide the voluntary identification, and that's something that you can certainly ask. If your employee does indicate that she or he consents to disclosure of their identity, then you're good to go. I would get that in writing. That's why we have some sample notices on a resource guide that we're building out, so that you can have this conversation in writing, because everything is a whirlwind, right? everything is spinning in your head, everything is spinning in your employee's head, and to be able to look at a document that's been given to them that kind of outlines that conversation, yes, you'll be able to work from home. Here's how often you need to follow up. Here are the benefits that you have. This is when we expect the, premium payment for the medical, right? And obviously we want to try to give as much grace depending on what the financial piece looks like for that employee, but be consistent, right? You can't do for employee A what you're not doing for employee B and C. So make sure that these thoughts are happening now, and what is that practice going to be? What is that policy going to be? You want to make sure that when you're assessing the contact with others, that you indicate, whether or not they've been exposed. Are they a remote worker, a potential remote worker? That's important. I mean, if I'm you, I'm putting a roster of all of my employees together today, and I'm listing, are they a remote worker possibility? What would they be eligible for any of the paid leave, right? Because there are some caveats that some have to be employed 30 days for some of the benefits, some is immediate. So we've got to coordinate, what that looks like as of the date of exposure or notification. And that could change from now until then. So put all those things together and ensure that you've got the plan in place, and for what employee the plan, what is the plan for each employee. I almost got tongue-tied there. So continuing on that conversation of assessment of contact with others, now you've got to do that same process with them, right? Were they a remote worker? What is their new schedule going to be? Who did they come into close proximity? And again, that 14-day period is about what we look for, right? Who did you come into close proximity, right? 3 to 6 feet, right? That's what we're calling is social distancing within the last 14 days. Have them pull out their, I'm going to age myself with this one, day timer, right? Which is now our phones, right? Pull out the phone, see, who they've been in contact, who they met with, because they may have forgotten, the one-off employee contact or a customer contact that they had, but might be recorded in their timeline of their calendar, right? Share tools and work products and projects again with that individual. Make sure that if they've spent time in the community and shared spaces in the last 14 days, that you encourage them to notify those locations, right? Oh, I went and did the outdoor cycling day, whatever it is, right? Hopefully that's not the case, but you never know. We've got to look and think outside the box so that we can help to mitigate the risk of exposure for people and get ahead of it, right? So with the voluntary identification, thank you for that question or that comment. That is an important thing, but make sure you get it in writing, right? Make sure if the employee does consent to the disclosure that you've got that indication in writing. And obviously any individuals with whom the employee's identity is disclosed should be instructed to keep the information confidential, right? You, the employer or the designated communicator, was given the okay to release that information, not the employee. Does that make sense, right? So it's just you, not everybody who you've told. I always err on the side of caution and say, you know what? Although it's permitted to get the self-identification done voluntarily, I say just don't do it, right? Because you can't, it gets tricky because, yep, Jane, it gets tricky. We said the same thing when you've got to now keep everybody else on a hush, right? And then what does that do in terms of, maybe you've got a collective bargaining agreement, right? Maybe you've got to worry about a union workforce out there. They have the right to talk about the nature of their pay, employment, working conditions meaning anything covered under OSHA. So it gets a little sticky, although you can do it. My recommendation, err on the side of caution and don't even go there, okay? So then how do you have that workforce notification? Is that something that you're going to do one-on-one? Do you find a place that has room, right? Your main area where you can keep people separated and social distance while you have this conversation. And then we've got to remember that, people are going to be uneasy, right? We tend to be unaware and uneasy with the unknown, right? So are we having these conversations ahead of the time, right? Do we have a plan in place to maybe share this webinar with your employees to say, this is what we've just learned, this is the guidance that we have, this is where and how we are going to conduct ourselves in our workplace, so that they've got some understanding of what's going to happen around them, and that helps give them a little bit of assurance, a little bit more calm, for lack of a better word, that everything's going to be all right, and that their employer has their best interests at heart, but has put a plan together before you needed the plan, right? Important information. So I wanted to challenge a few of you, do a little fun thing. This office layout that you're looking at, that I'm using for my presentation, I am giving away an hour's free consultation for anyone who might have noticed what show this office layout comes from. And no, it's not The Office. So if you've got an idea, if you're on TV and you're watching shows, this actually comes from a TV show out there. So if you recognize the layout, put it in the chat and you'll get a free 1 hour's consultation with me for any HR topics or COVID topics that we can chat about. So wanted to include that really quick. So let's take a look. I've got some poll questions that I kind of wanted to run by you and just see a little bit about what we are doing out there. It should pop up here shortly. And again, I'm watching the chat, so let me know, please, if you've got any questions. So do you know the CDC guidelines for proper disinfection? So I'll go ahead and close this poll. Go ahead and answer that, and then I'll just give you the results. We've still got a couple coming in. Everybody participate. Love it. Thank you. Awesome. So I'm going to close that. Get your click on, people. Coffee and a click. Coffee and a click. I'll end this poll now. And the results say that, hopefully you can see that, about 33% of you excellent. About 33% say that they do. We've got 50% that aren't sure, and another 17% as well. So hopefully you saw that. And we'll get back to our presentation. So that's interesting, right? And as a result of this webinar, we will be providing a quick links file. I'll share that with you in a moment to ensure that you do have those resources in the workplace. We've got a sample notification to customers. I'm working on a resource guide really pretty much as we speak. I anticipate it should be ready by Monday, and I'll give you an idea of how you can get that complimentary. So a sample notification to customers, a sample notification to employee, and a sample notification to your workplace, as well as a sample media notice. So definitely something that you want to consider. Now, I've got a couple of documents that I kind of wanted to share with you. Let's see where we are. And a way that we can get you some resources. So these are some ways that you can get additional resources. So if you pull out that cell phone and text COVID to that number there, 415-528-7403, you will receive the quick links resource guide. That resource guide will provide, it's a quick 2-pager, and the first page is the cover page, right? That will provide you CDC's guidelines on exposure, disinfection, particularly. Let me see if I can pull that guide up and share that with you as well, so you know exactly which links we're talking about. And I will share this with you as well. Let's see. just so you have an idea of what that looks like. Okay, so we've got clear as mud, right? Let me get that bigger for you. Interim guidance for businesses and employers to plan in response. That is a document from the CDC, cleaning and disinfecting, another CDC. CDC again, I mean, they are really coming out with a lot of resource guides, and this is a great way to have it all in one place, right? You've got your OSHA guidance, you've got some more OSHA information on that, you've got the EEOC. This was a great resource for me as I navigate and become familiar with how all of the laws kind of work together. So yes, I have to educate myself, and I keep myself well educated for you all. Another one on EEOC and how the ADA, right? And my role here is not to, you know me, if you've ever been in my classes, if you've ever worked with me, I look to skill and equip my employers. I am always here for you. You can always pick up the phone, and we can continue to be a resource and provide all of that information. And then you can definitely reach out to me, but at least you've got some guidance here. So thank you for that. I will go ahead and have you view this in 2 pages. And you can see a little bit more information, some more CDC guidance, and a Department of Labor site that provides the, yep, Jose, I'll definitely show that number again, the Fair Families First CARES Act. So a lot of information, all of these wonderful resources. So this quick links guide, the 2-page I just showed with all of those quick links, is available when you text COVID, COVID, to the number on the screen above there. The other is if you book a consultation, there's the link right there, and you'll get a follow-up email after this webinar sometime later today, thanking you for your attendance, and then the link to book a consultation. And when you book a consultation, you will receive a complete toolkit and resource guide that I've actually been using to have and conduct this webinar, right? Everything you heard from me and then some will be included, the media guide, the sample notification to your customers, sample workforce guide, all of that stuff. And, get your list of questions together. And it could be COVID related, it could be just generally HR related. And let's have a conversation. Allow us the honor to help support you in what you do, and then we will provide the larger resource guides, about 9 pages or so, last look. So, and that should be developed by Monday, but you can schedule that consultation at any time. So let's take a look and see if we've got any questions. We are right at the end of our time here today. I want to thank you all for staying engaged, staying on the call. So many out there. I'm thankful to see you all, but I will take any questions. Let's see, looks like yes, if an employee consents to being identified, it does make it easier, but it does get tricky. Yes, Jane, absolutely right on that. There's the number for those who want that resource guide. Let's see, I've got a question here. Can the employer require an employee who's been diagnosed with COVID to show a medical certificate stating that they are already free of the disease? Absolutely. We can certainly request those documents. What I do ask, though, is that we be patient with that recommendation, because our healthcare professionals, God help them, they are on the front lines. And oftentimes the CDC guidelines are what you could use. They will definitely receive, if they have been hospitalized, right, discharge papers. So those would be dated typically, and you could use those alongside the CDC's guideline in terms of how long they've been out of the medical care and that kind of thing, and then request the return to work. We're seeing a backlog, obviously, in the request for certification information. based on the request for not emergency family and medical leave, but family medical leave, right? Because now I've got to take care of someone with an illness, right? So I may trigger family medical leave for myself. So just be patient with the request of that, and hopefully that employee will be permitted to use any time off. They would be eligible for sick leave, right? The emergency paid sick leave if they've been diagnosed. And keep in mind, there are very specific reasons why they would be covered or required. You would be required as an employer to pay those benefits. So keep that in mind. Taking a temperature or asking about your symptoms does not look so accurate. If you could rephrase that question, I'm not really sure if I understand the question, but there is guidance in both the CDC and the EEOC that permits an employer to take temperatures. I actually know a dear colleague of mine, actually, I'll give them a great plug here. They are a local chamber member as well. Again, the Miramar Pembroke Pines Regional Chamber of Commerce is stepping up to the plate to offer these great opportunities to you to learn, whether you're a member or not, right, at a great price for those of you who may not be. But they are ISI, Indemnity Security Investigations. They actually have I just saw it like 2 days ago on their social media, a technology or I don't know what it is. It almost looks like a camera phone that will actually scan someone's temperature with this scanner thing. Again, it looks like a cell phone, but keep in mind, temperature reads are not the only thing that will give you an indication that the employee may or may not be ill with COVID, right? That's really not the only indicator. There are so many other symptoms. That's just one of several. That's just one indicator. So let's see. What is the recommendation about employer taking EE's temperature? Great question, Joanna. And the CDC has some very clear guidelines about that. Keeping in mind, it's, again, not the only indicator, but the EEOC also has some great resources on that. And that COVID, if you text COVID, Joanna, to that number, the quick links guide will give you that exact answer, but there's some very specific things. And it's generally the same thing, right? You can't test just one set of employees. You've got to test all, right? We want to make sure that we are not doing anything discriminatorily in our workplaces, and especially with COVID-19. If you test one, you must test all. What does that policy look like? What are you going to do if they do have a, what's normal, 96 point something? Well, what are you going to do if they have a 98? You've got to be prepared with a policy in place to address all of those questions. But there is the permission. We are permitted, according to the CDC and the EEOC, to do temperature take. Hopefully that answers your question. I'm not sure what the recommendation piece is, but obviously it would be before they enter the workplace, that kind of thing. So it's like punching in, right? Punch in and here's the thermometer. So, but again, not the only indicator. So the question is, in the private sector, can the employer deny paying paid time off due to financial crisis? So that's a really big question, and one that coordinates with a couple of things, Jose. So the private sector cannot deny paying PTO, right? If your employees have earned their vacation time, their sick time, then they have the right to take those things, right? I have seen a few employers, and a client of mine particularly, whose benefit book, whose plan indicates that, oh, benefits can change at any time, right? So, well, they just changed and I'm not paying you your sick or vacation time. You got to consider the impact there, right? What is that going to do to your internal population when they've earned PTO time and then we don't pay it? Now, there are some stipulations, and we're still waiting to get the definition of those employers who are under 50 and can be exempted from the Emergency Paid Sick Leave Act, okay? And it's kind of like family medical leave, right? Undue hardship or reasonable accommodation, undue hardship. How do we define that? You know how that gets defined? That gets defined when people start to get sued, okay? So if there is a financial crisis, then yes, that may exempt an employer under 50 employees, right? Because if you're under 500 employees, the emergency paid sick leave is mandatory. If you are a covered employer, you must pay those benefits for qualifying reasons. Okay, there are 6, I believe, qualifying reasons. And so the only caveat is if you're under 50 employees and you can show, I think it's financial, it's like, undue hardship. I've got the word in my head and it's just not coming out. Hopefully that answers your question, but that resource guide will also outline that. At the other webinar that I mentioned to you about the webinar I did with a CPA that discussed how the paid, the PPP, the EIDL loan, and all of these other financial resources that we have, that you have access to be able to afford and pay all of these. Now, I'm not going to get into the conversation about, I applied 6 weeks ago, I still haven't seen anything. We just saw more money released, so reapply. What can I tell you? It is a crazy, crazy dynamic out there, and we're seeing so much change so quickly. But there is some new funding available, so please feel free to apply for those benefits to handle that. So we are right at 9:55. For those of you on the call, and I think I see a few of you, we were able to get an hour's SHRM credit for this webinar. So if you've stayed on and you are looking for that credit, go ahead and put a note in the chat box. I know I see a couple of my well-respected colleagues out there who I know have certification. So go ahead and put that in the chat. I wasn't able to get that automatically sent after the webinar. So if you need your SHRM credit for this course, by all means, shoot me a text. You've got my email as well in the, if we're already linked on my emails and stuff. So we will be able to provide an hour of SHRM credit for your attendance today. I am still taking questions until the very last minute. So please do feel free to continue to ask those questions. And I know my dear, dear colleague, I do consider him a friend as well, Robert Goltz, the chamber president of the Chamber of Miramar and Pembroke Pines, is on the line, and feel free to let me know in the chat if you'd like to have me share anything. I want to thank the Miramar Pembroke Pines Regional Chamber of Commerce for allowing me the opportunity to present this information to you. It will be an evergreen webinar that you will be able to access again and again, I believe, through a chamber resource that they'll be putting together. I'll also do that as well on our website and our COVID-19 resource page available on our website. And if you're not on our newsletter, texting that COVID, if you're not already in our newsletter, that will eventually invite you for that subscription as well. And so you will continue to get some guides. Normally our newsletters only sent twice a month, but in light of the current workforce dynamic, we've probably been sending 2 a week. As things come out, we've got resource guides on how to have these conversations with your employee if you've got to furlough or lay off. I've been through that. I was the HR director at the Fontainebleau in Miami Beach during the 9/11 attacks, 218, I'll never forget the number, layoffs later. I had to coordinate that massive event. So I understand, I've been there, I can empathize and relate to what might be going on in the workplaces out there. Allow us to be a benefit and a resource to you all. With that, I am right at 9:58. It has certainly been a pleasure to provide you all with this information. If there is anything that I or my firm can do to meet your needs during this time, please do give us that opportunity to do so. I'll still take any questions, and we'll turn off our recording at this time and still take take questions. Would love to connect with any of you digitally on my social media pages. We're trying to really be a resource for everyone at this time. Thank you all for your time this morning. And again, HBL Resources is here for you.
Welcome back, everybody, to today's Bizfit program. And thank you to Lisa for that pre-recorded webinar. If you joined us a little late, Lisa was unable to join us live because of an illness, so we wish her well and speedy recovery. In a few minutes, we will go to a break, which will be an hour long, and we hope to see you back here at 3 o'clock, at which time we will get back onto the live agenda with a speaker talking about reopening plan checklists. So reopening from the coronavirus situation from 3 to 4, followed by a speaker on 2021 business plan types from 4 to 5. Just a reminder that the program does have virtual booths in our exhibit hall, so please take time out to visit those and leave your information, have a live chat with the folks at those booths. And at this point, I will sign off for an hour-long break and rejoin you at 3 o'clock.